Hello everyone, we welcome you all to this Week Tech Tuesday webinar on what's new in cloud mass ingestion and best practices. Today's speakers are Dhirendra, Om and Sahishnu. Before we start the session, let's go through some of the housekeeping tips. The webinar is for 1 hour that includes 15 minutes Q&A. You can post your queries in Q&A box which will be answered at the end of the presentation. All participants will be muted during the presentation. The session will be recorded and it will be available on our Infra Support YouTube channel and Success Portal where you can download the slide deck. Please feel free to submit your suggestion or feedback for this session in the post-webinar survey. The Success Portal is a micro-learning platform that offers free, unlimited learning to all the registered users. This feature-rich platform helps you learn and adopt to Informatica products better. The following are few important links that you can go over later. This will help you in your product adoption journey with Informatica. Over to you, Dhirendra, Om and Sahishnu. Thank you.
Thanks, Harshita. Welcome everybody to today's session. First of all, a very good morning and good evening to all the folks who have joined in from different parts of the globe. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Sahishnu Sinha. I am part of Cloud Mass Ingestion product management team here at Informatica. Today we are going to discuss exciting things about CMI, which is Cloud Mass Ingestion, along with newly added capabilities under Cloud Mass Ingestion portfolio and best practices for CMI. In previous sessions, we have had detailed discussions on cloud mass ingestion, where we talked on how to ingest or replicate data from different sources, which can be any application, database, files, or streaming sources to target of my choice. And again, it can be any cloud data lake, data warehouse, or messaging system for any use case ranging from analytics, AI operationalization, or dashboarding, etc. So let's now move on to the next slide. So we are going to discuss why Informatica Cloud Mass Ingestion, then we'll give a brief overview of CMI and products under CMI umbrella. We'll also discuss on the new capabilities introduced, say, in last 6 to 8 months. And then we'll move on to discuss best practices and then conclude with the summary. So now, why Cloud Mass Ingestion? So any data management program comprises of various stages or use cases. For example, any organization may have a variety of data sources. Now, the first challenge for these organizations is on data assets. Companies have a basic questions like, do we know which all data assets we have? So this comprises of discovery part, which means, are we able to discover those assets, or say we are able to catalog those assets? Once we have found what I want, the next question obviously comes, are we able to ingest or replicate? Once replicated, companies give a thought on how to know whether data is of good quality. There might be scenarios where we need to massage data. We may need to apply certain transformations to be able to make data analytics ready or any use case ready. Then similarly, we have governance mechanism in place to govern the data, and similarly, mastering and securing the data are other aspects. So earlier companies were focused on solving their use cases through ETL concepts, which basically means extract, transform, load. But now the momentum has shifted to ELT, which means extract the data first, then load into various cloud data warehouse or data lake targets, and then if needed, ingest or transform the data for further consumption. This is where cloud mass ingestion comes into limelight. So the focus is now on ingestion and replication part. That means, how do I get data from disparate sources in real time and load into targets of our choice? So here comes CMI, which helps different companies to solve these kind of use cases. Moving on, let's now discuss on CMI and its offerings. So as mentioned earlier, CMI stands for Cloud Mass Ingestion. Mass ingestion means the ingestion or replication of large amounts of data for use or storage in a database or a repository. The database can be a data lake, a cloud repository, or a Hadoop cluster. CMI offers 4 amazing data replication products, namely database mass ingestion, application mass ingestion, file mass ingestion, and streaming ingestion. Name of the products itself speaks what the product is capable of. So database mass ingestion, or DBMI in short, can ingest data at scale from common relational databases and propagate the data to multiple types of targets, including cloud-based targets and targets that can handle big data. Application mass ingestion can transfer data from software as a service, which means SaaS, and on-premise applications to cloud-based data lakes, data warehouses, and event streaming platform. File mass ingestion, or FMI, is used to transfer a large number of files of any file type between on-premises and cloud repositories and to track and monitor file transfers. And finally, streaming ingestion is capable to ingest data at a scale from any data sources such as logs, clickstream, social media, and IoT sources. Moving to the next slide. So CMI is essentially a very easy to use wizard-based service. You can see this screen when you log into the Informatica Cloud. So you will have this option. You can select mass ingestion and then start building different tasks under CMI products. So as I mentioning, like CMI is a very easy to use wizard-based service, and it can help create replication pipelines in matter of minutes. We do offer versatile out-of-box connectivity for a range of source and targets. And yes, we do offer enterprise-grade capabilities such as real-time monitoring, lifecycle management, scheduling, etc. Now with that, I'll move on to the next slide. So this is the high-level architecture of CMI, where you see there is a secure agent which sits closer to the source and it kind of interacts with the IDMC, which means Informatica Intelligent Data Management Services. And from the source, it ingests or replicates data onto the supported target, and details about supported source and targets I'll be sharing soon in the couple of next slides. So this whole architecture is common to all the 4 CMI services, but obviously source and target combinations for each services can be different. Now, a couple of capabilities to call out over here, especially for DBMI and AppMI. One of the important things to take care is the CDC. So we do provide change data capture for all sources. So any change which happens on the source in terms of new transaction coming in, we kind of replicate it onto the target side. And at the same point of time, we take care of the schema drift as well. Any change in the schema is eventually replicated onto the target time. Now, if I talk on the common forte, then real-time monitoring is one such capability which helps in managing the life cycle. Moreover, we have alerting mechanism through which users can create and help them keep a tab on what is exactly happening onto the ingestion job which they have created. And the last one which you see over here is the orchestration part. So user can orchestrate the ingestion job in a managed and as a secured service, I would say. So these are being taken care of as part of CMI. I'll move on to the next one. This slide provides a crisp idea on different sources and targets for each of the CMI offerings. For application ingestion, users can ingest data from sources such as SAP, Oracle Fusion, Workday, Salesforce, Adobe Analytics, Google Analytics, NetSuite, etc. Similarly, DBMI or database mass ingestion supports Oracle's SQL Server, MySQL, and plenty of other sources on the relational side. And on the non-relational end, we support MongoDB, and we would be again expanding that onto other NoSQL sources as well. For files, the sources can be local folder, Hadoop files, Amazon S3, Databricks Delta, among others. And finally, for streaming sources can be Kafka, Google PubSub, Google BigQuery, flat files, etc. Obviously, these are just few which I have mentioned over here, but we do provide a laundry list of sources for different CMI services. Now, the target for the aforementioned sources can be data lakes, data warehouses, or various messaging systems. Some of the supported targets are mentioned here, but like sources, these are just a few of the targets. And yes, we do provide a laundry list of targets as well for different CMI services. Let's now deep dive into the new capabilities introduced in CMI offerings. So starting with application ingestion. From the connectivity standpoint, we have recently introduced a new connector for SAP, which makes use of ABAP framework. So ABAP, or Advanced Business Application Programming, is the primary programming language supported on SAP NetWeaver ABAP application server platform. and applications that run on it, such as SAP ERP, S/4HANA, and CRM. We already used to support SAP ODP, so this SAP ABAP is the successor one. Next is Oracle target support for various combinations of sources, and likewise Databricks and Microsoft SQL Server target support. From core ingestion capabilities, we added browse-based selection of objects. So what this means? So it lets one help select the list of tables and columns using a browse interface so that the user can select the tables manually along with the rules interface. We also added partitioning support for Salesforce Bulk V2 Unload, which provided, I think, 11 times increase in performance. And finally, from enterprise readiness, we introduced Oracle Fusion Replication UI using BICC framework. We already support REST API mechanism for Oracle Fusion, but BICC, which is Business Intelligence Cloud Connector, is the new one. Moreover, we added support for human capital management, customer experience, sales, and service modules in Oracle Fusion. So these were the items which were recently added for application ingestion. Obviously, these are the major ones which I have just covered. So there are a lot of other capabilities which we have introduced. So moving on to the next slide. So here I'll talk about the capabilities for file mass ingestion and streaming ingestion, which have been recently added. So for streaming, Google BigQuery is introduced as a new target from the connectivity point of view. Core ingestion capability for streaming included new authentication mechanisms for Amazon Kinesis and Kafka. In addition to that, Avro data format support for source and target has also been introduced. And streaming ingestion enterprise readiness feature includes Databricks Delta using SQL Analytics Engine approach, which means while connecting to Databricks, you simply need to provide the access URL to connect to Databricks instead of filling a huge list of details. So this capability has been added for file mass ingestion as well. You can see over here, I mentioned it. Now, moving on to file mass ingestion. So to enhance connectivity, we have introduced Cloud Integration Hub as source and target. So Cloud Integration Hub is Informatica's offering, which uses modern publish, subscribe patterns to seamlessly connect hundreds of supported cloud and on-premises systems. We have also added options to fail a job for FTP, SFTP, FTPS, and local target files, and also have added options to store duplicate files information onto the secure agent. So if there are duplicate files at the source, so while processing, we can store that on the secure agent as well. So with that, I'll just stop over here and I shall pass the baton to Dhiren for DBMI features and best practices. Over to you, Dhiren.
Hey, thanks, Aishnu, for covering the details on the overview of Cloud Mass Ingestion and also talking about some of the recent capabilities that we have added on app ingestion as well as on streaming and files. These are some great features, and I'm sure that people would love to know more about this. Now, with that, let me quickly introduce myself first. And hi, I'm Dhirendra Sinha, part of the product management team here at Informatica. And I take care mostly on the database mass ingestion side. With that, let me dive into details. So let me first talk about what are some of the recent capabilities that we have added in last couple of months. So there are three different buckets, which I think Sahishnu also talked about, that there are areas of focus for us, connectivity being one of it. Then there are features on the core ingestion, and finally on the enterprise readiness side, we did focus in the last couple of months as well. So if we look from connectivity perspective, there were a lot of requests which we received on extending the support of cloud mass ingestion, especially on the database side for cloud RDS as target. Now, with that in mind, we extended support for Oracle and SQL Server. So we support Oracle and SQL Server as target now. And as part of the initiative that we have with Oracle, we are expanding our footprint and have added Oracle ADB as well as object storage as target on our end. Now, that was one addition which we did in our last release only. Then there was one area that we kind of went on to, that being on the NoSQL front. So MongoDB was also one of the use cases that we heard from many different customers, that they want to move their data from Mongo and move it to cloud data warehouses. Now we have added support for MongoDB as source, and that kind of caters to both initial as well as incremental load. Then finally, on the MySQL side, this was pending from many, I would say, releases. Customers reached out to us that they want CDC support on the MySQL end, and we have added that on our end. And also the combined load support over here. So we do support now incremental changes from MySQL to be replicated onto the supported target as well as the combined load as well. Now on the core ingestion side, there are some important feature additions that we did, timestamp based CDC being one of them. Now the use case behind this was, customers reaching and stating that they might not be able to provide access to their log files since these are maintained by some third parties. So in many such cases, going through the logs and having the changes figured out was quite difficult. So in those circumstances, timestamp based CDC would come handy and help us identify the changes which has happened and replicate them onto the target end. Now, when I say that, there is one prerequisite that all the tables which we are looking to have the CDC done should have this timestamp column as part of it. So yeah, that was on the CDC part. Then we did some important performance enhancement as well, partitioning support in order to improve the reader performance on the sources end was one of it, and that kind of enhanced performance for Oracle and SQL Server. And while I say this, we are running tests which are quite promising on our end, and we would be able to share more results once we get onto some numbers over here. So that was on the performance end. Then we added support for audit mode, especially for Oracle as target. Now this was also request from different customers. So this was being catered, and now Oracle has support for audit mode. So users ingesting data into Oracle would now be able to see the trail of changes. And as part of that, all the DML would be inserted in the target table, as well as they would have some extra column which will eventually help them identify on a lot of different aspects in terms of the metadata for that particular row, from where it is coming, what was the when it was updated, and various other aspects are covered as part of this. So that's one important addition which was done. Then support for SQL Server CDC table approach. Now CDC is already supported through log-based mechanism in case of SQL Server, but again, as was the case with customers, that accessing the log files was also becoming a challenge at times. And then this CDC table approach was something which was recommended as well from Microsoft. So we went ahead and added support for CDC table approach in case of SQL Server. So now instead of going to the log file, which is still there, by the way, a user can also use the CDC table approach in order to get the changes replicated onto target. Then there were some other enhancement. Now, I'm not going to cover the entire detail, but and this is not the entire list, folks. There were a lot of changes which were done on other aspects as well, which is not covered over here. We just tried keeping the important ones over here. Then on the enterprise readiness side, one of the things which we added recently was to enhance the usability of the application. So we have now browse-based selection of tables which user can do on the screen where while they are selecting the objects as part of the source selection. So apart from utilizing your rule-based selection, you can also browse through the list of objects from where you can select, pick and choose the desired objects to be replicated again on the target end. Then audit support for Databricks Delta. Again, this was added in recent release, so something which we have done. So we have a very rich feature addition that we did in recent time on the database mass ingestion. And if there are any specific query related to any of these specific feature, please do write to us or ask queries as well. We'll be happy to answer those. Now, with that, let me go into the best practices part of some of the best practices that I wanted to talk about, because there has been a lot of discussions in and out in terms of what should be some of the maybe source based practices, then what can be some of the target based practices that we should be looking at, since we have started seeing a lot of customers adopting for different use cases. CMI is becoming one of the important elements in their data journey. So we wanted to keep a list of some of the important best practices that user can use on their end. Now, the first one which you see over here is the best practices based on use cases. Now, there are some typical use cases which we see based on the patterns and the ingestion type, especially. And we have tried listing what can be the go-to solution in such cases, because there is CMI, there is element of CDI, there is APDO and things like that. But what eventually will help the user in some of the use cases that are there on the customer end. So if you have ELT pattern especially, then the primary go-to solution in that case would be CMI, where you can use it to ingest data and then use our downstream transformation service, CDI, clubbed with APDO, which will give you the capability to have the push down done as well. So if anything related to ELT pattern you want to use, definitely the go-to solution can be CMI along with our downstream transformation services. Then on the second part, if at all we see applications, databases, mainframe, which quote unquote consist of DB2 I series or ZOS in our case, or files, and you want to ingest it into maybe data lake or maybe cloud data warehouse, replicate the changes, then CMI is the go-to solution for you. The same is the case for real-time CDC ingestion as well, when there is no transformation as such, which is mostly the ELT pattern again, and there you should be using CMI, which is cloud mass ingestion. Then couple of things on the Kafka as target. Again, CMI would be the go-to solution. Then real-time CDC, data replication, if you want to do on the cloud data warehouses, may it be Snowflake, Databricks Delta, or Synapse for that matter, or even BigQuery, you should be using CMI for such use cases. One of the important, say, line I wanted to draw over here is if you see use cases where you have transformations to be done, then ideally CDC data integration along with transformations, if that's the use case, then ideally CDI is something which one should be going ahead with. And then if you are talking about capturing data from mainframe, IDMS, IMS, or VSAM kind of a system, CDI is something which you should be using, because we don't have support right now on the CMI side. So that would be an go-to choice for such use cases. Then again, for schema drift, which is one important capability which CMI has, if at all there is a use case where you see source having the schema changes done, and you want to replicate those changes onto the target automatically, I would say CMI would be the best fit solution for such use cases. Now, this kind of sums up how to approach some of the use cases that we have been seeing in terms of patterns on the customer end. We have tried listing out those, and mostly the ELT patterns you can cover with a combination, as I said, with CMI and CDI, and all the real-time use cases without transformations can be used using or can be addressed using CMI. But other than that, I mean, if at all CDC with transformations, CDI might be the best fit solution for that. Now that kind of sums up from a use case standpoint. Let's move forward. Now, we covered some of the best practices related to use cases. Now let's talk about some of the general best practices, because we have been talking with different customers, their use cases, and we have seen several times the customer end up with some issue or the other. I mean, again, the challenges can be something which can be typically based on the customer use cases, but many a time some of this can be addressed because we have seen some patterns and we have tried identifying those patterns over here. So these are some of the general best practices. First one being, you should minimize the network hop on your end. Now what I mean by this, that it is recommended to keep your secure agent closer to the source database. We have seen customers using on-prem source and they kind of keep their secure agent on the cloud, which kind of gives a lag over there in order to push the data, and there is lot of network latency which kind of comes into picture. So in such cases, it's always a good practice to minimize the network hop. Then batching up your changes, that's definitely important, which will allow you to there is a fetch limit which is defined. This is a custom property. Now batching up the changes gives you the throughput, and we have seen that it kind of helps you achieve performance, significant performance gain as well. So the second point would be to batch up your changes. And then source partitioning, which we have recently added, as I was talking while covering on the database mass ingestion side, in terms of the capabilities that we have added. Now this is one important area for the improvement on the partitioning end, which kind of enhances the performance for Oracle and SQL Server. And we have some intelligence that we have put in the system that it shouldn't be bringing any overhead onto the database, that any smaller table which doesn't require as such partitioning to be done is kind of not taken into account, and only the bigger tables which is defaulted to greater than 1 GB of size is kind of considered for partitioning, right? Now, these are some of the best practices based on the sources. Talking about databases particularly, I'll start with maybe Oracle, which is one of the predominant use cases while we talk of the coverage in terms of the source on our end. Now, restart advance is one of the important parameters that we have brought in recent release. Now, what this helps is that there is a restart marker which helps users or the application not to go back in the log file, and this restart marker is saved so that you can refer to this restart marker in case there is a restart, and there is no rescanning of the log files back again. So you are not losing on the scanning which is already done, and if the reader has already done some scan and the data is available, you don't need to go back again if in case there is a restart. So That's important, and this is done periodically. I mean, after a certain period of time, that okay, the log has been scanned till this point of time, even when even before there is a commit point, it kind of keeps providing those restart marker which are being saved on our end. Then there are different log access mechanism which is being asked frequently, which one is better or which one I should be using. So there are different access mechanism for logs. Now, when we talk of this, redo log access is the most performant way. But in case of cluster setup, we have seen that ASM is the preferred approach in order to read log files in a performant manner. But there are other, say, log access mechanisms which we support currently for Oracle. One being you can mount it on an NFS, and then we can use the B file log access as well. So these are some different mechanisms of accessing the log, and it depends the use case which the customer has. We can go ahead and utilize any of this log access mechanism in order to retrieve the CDC data. Then on the access and privilege side, I mean if the logs are being managed by ASM, we need to have the sys ASM or sys DBA permission in order to have the CDC changes taken care. Then one important point of contention which we have seen with customers is the log retention period. What would be the apt log retention period which will not let me lose any, I would say, data point on my end. And from the application point of view, it is also suitable in order to have that, changes read from this log file. So the longest period for which you can expect the change capture to be stopped or latent, I think that's the time plus an hour on top of it would be something that we would be looking at, so that the logs are available ideally when the jobs are restarted. So that's more on the log retention side that one needs to keep into account. Then I think I already covered the CDC table approach for SQL Server. This is an important addition based on some of the customers not able to provide log access. We have seen typically such cases. So SQL Server, this is one important consideration which customers can use now. And then on the DB2 side, we have some parameters for sorting to be done, which kind of helps improve the performance. Also, there have been cases for CPU consumption on the I-series side, which is predominantly seen from many customers using I-series. Now, this has nothing to do with the application. This is more on the DB2 I-series end, where it needs to provide set of log which are being asked by the application. In order to provide that also, sometimes we have seen there is a spike in the CPU utilization. So we have some delay parameters that we have introduced, which helps you in making sure that your CPU consumption are within limit. So that was more on the database side. Now covering the applications. So a couple of things on the API end specifically. Now, CDC interval in case of API is something which we should be choosing judiciously in order to ensure there is optimal uses of API calls, because we have seen that there are times when there are limits which are being set. So that's one area which one should be looking at. Then also one needs to ensure that there is enough of API limit which is available. So that's more on the API call, and we have seen typically with GBQ and others where there is a limit of some 1500 calls, API calls, and that kind of creates some point of contention as well. But eventually that can be taken care with some of the areas of improvement that we have done as well. Then on the Salesforce side, I mean, in order to have a performant reading capability, I mean, users can always enable partitions. So that's one thing they need to take care of. And while they are choosing partitioning, they need to define the appropriate number of partitions also. And finally, set the optimal batch size to be read from Salesforce, which I was pointing earlier as well, while I was covering the general, I would say, best practices. Now, these are some best practices for files and streaming specifically. So I won't go into detail of each one of those. I'll just cover some important ones over here. Now, I mean, if you want to process the files in near real time, file listener would be a good choice, which can be used as a source. Performance is one of the key areas which I mean, users look for. So users can always tune parallel batch and batch size on their end in order to have the performance improvement taken care. Then on the streaming side, Jolt is one of the transformations which they can use in order to flatten the complex JSON structure, and they don't need to write complex code using Java or Python. So that's one of the suggestions which we tend to provide. And configuring your reject directory, which is again important in order to identify what data was rejected ideally, which is not there on the target. So that's something which should be done and aptly configured. And user can also set up some advanced properties, which helps in optimizing performance and use of resources as well on the streaming side. Now, these are some of the target best practices. I just tried capturing some of it for Snowflake and Kafka. So on the Snowflake side, I mean, there is an option to override the number of threads that Snowflake put command uses. And there is this property which is marked in blue over there, which you can see. I mean, you can always shoot it up based on if the file is large, you can increase the number of thread on your end. Now for Kafka, user can configure property in order to ensure optimal number of messages sent to the target. And this kind of forces a checkpoint to be saved on that end. So and the property again are marked in blue over here. So these are some of the I would say properties or best practices which users can use in order to optimize the performance and make sure they are getting the best out of the application. Now, yeah, I mean, this is again one important area where there have been a lot of discussions in what should be the agent sizing. Now, there are different services which uses different core and memory on for different operations. But when we talk of, I mean, DBMI in particular, it requires a minimum of 8 cores, but we always recommend users to use 16 cores on their end. And the typical memory size that is being suggested is 32 GB. Now, the more I mean, they are able to add in terms of the size of the infrastructure, the better the performance would be, but definitely something to consider while they are starting off with the database mass ingestion. Specifically, user can look at some of this configuration which are listed over here. Then max task unit is again one important property. Now, this is the maximum number of tasks which can run concurrently when the secure agent is up and running. So this property is being determined at a service level, and so the DBMI service eventually helps you set this property. And there is a KB article in terms of how many max task unit users should be having based on the number of tables which are there. But important to note, we have already documented such use cases in terms of the max task unit. So one important area in terms of sizing would be to look at this particular parameter as well. And then heap memory allocation. We have seen cases that there are out of memory exceptions which user get. Now we typically recommend user to increase the heap size memory and keep it close to 2/3 or 3/4 of the total memory. Now the memory that you are allocating for heap size won't be utilized fully at all the times, but this kind of helps in making sure that you are not hitting the ceiling in such cases and not going in out of memory exception use cases. Okay, so that was more, I know I talked a lot and covered some of the aspects related to, different areas, but I'll try just pointing out what I just now talked. So these are some of the best practices based on the use cases. Then I touched on the source based use cases as well, based on different sources. I talked about Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, which are some of the predominant sources on the database mass ingestion side. Then we covered on the app and what would be some of the apt, say, best practices related to Salesforce and some of the API calls which are which can become point of contention at times based on the source target combination that you are choosing. And then we had a look onto files and streaming as well in terms of what are some of the best practices of that. And then we jumped on to the agent sizing, which is again an important area to look at. Now, all of this which I talked about is based on the different interaction which we had with the customers. So if there are more use cases which you are seeing, we'll love to talk more on that and discuss on some of this say best practices further. All right, so this is more of a summary. I think by now you must have seen this slide many a times, but I'll just keep it over here for 30 seconds and touch on, what's in summary CMI provides you with. So this is cloud native ingestion, helps you with connectivity to on-prem and cloud files. Then it takes care of IoT and streaming use cases. We have a widget-driven design approach that we take, which kind of eases the journey for the user in order to configure any ingestion job. And finally, real-time monitoring, which helps you figure out what is happening with your job and help you manage the entire life cycle of the job. Now, with that, I'll hand it over back and we'll open for questions over here. Thank you.
Hi all, we have reached the Q&A part. Please post your questions.
I see, hey everyone, Virendra on this side. I see a couple of questions from, I think, Jairam. So DTM parameter, I think this is more on the CDI side, Jairam, that you're asking. And there are parameters to improve performance, but if your use case is specifically for ingestion, I mean, where you need to ingest and have a ELT pattern, for which you want to ingest data onto, say, different supported target, I would recommend to use CMI over there, which is cloud mass ingestion. But definitely there are parameters which are there eventually on the DTM side as well on CDI, which helps you to have more, say, records buffered before it, I mean, to be batched in order to, before ingesting it onto the target. Okay, yeah, go ahead. There is one more which I see. If I understand this correct, what is the best limit for high number of jobs with high volume? And I hope this pertains to CMI again. If this is on the database side, we generally go with the number of jobs which can fit into a particular. So first of all, there is no limit as such. You can actually have in CMI, that's something which we have taken care. You can club as many tables as part of a single job as you can, if those tables are part of a single schema. Now, coming to the part how many you can club, definitely there will be slowness and there is an optimal number that one needs to reach at. So this kind of depends on the volume as well that you have for those tables and the agent sizing. So this is a combination of both. And based on that, you need to set the max task limit, which will govern the concurrent number of, I would say, tasks that can spawn in order to ingest data from your source onto the target. All right. Yeah, I'll let me know if that kind of answers Jairam for you. I see a couple of more questions. I'll take this one. So additional fields to the target like ID for each record onto the timestamp for ingestion. Okay. So I mean, I hope this is more from that the target is not having those additional columns. You want to have that as part of the ingestion. Currently, you won't be able to do it, but yeah, there is a way to achieve it at a, you can add on the target end itself. That schema change can eventually happen. But this is part of something which we are working on, to be precise, if I have to put it, because we had requests from customers who asked if at all they can have additional timestamp like say column added while they are ingesting, or maybe other information which can be added while they are ingesting onto the target, which we would be eventually taking care of. But currently, at this point of time, there is a workaround, but not a direct way to add while you are configuring your job. All right. So I'll move to some other questions. CDI and MI jobs are running on the same agent. Yeah. So typically, we suggest to use different agents for running your. Different agents for running your CMI jobs, particularly because at times unload can be intensive in terms of taking the infrastructure that you have provided. So it's always preferable to have a separate, say, secure agent, especially for your ingestion use cases. All right. Yeah. Do let us know if you are also interested in any specific area as well, because some of these areas that I talked today, or which Saishnu also covered in terms of the best practices, were mostly related to what we have been hearing from fields. So all this is which is coming in terms of different parameters, or maybe whatever the best practices contain for target, or eventually the agent sizing. are more from a field standpoint that we have gathered over a period of time. So let us know if you kind of want to double click on any specific areas. All right, I see there is another one. How does the initial load works before you start CDC? Okay, so CDC is mostly log-based capture on our end. When I talk of databases, eventually before that, we take a dump of the entire data which is available in the database and kind of put it as part of the initial load onto the target side. And then you can define different parameters in terms of where eventually your CDC would start. Is it latest restart point? Is it any particular, say, restart point that you want to precisely give, any timestamp that you want to provide? So there are different parameters that you can define. But after the initial ingestion, based on whatever you have chosen, the CDC would automatically kick in for combined load job. Okay. Yeah. So. Okay. This is okay. I see one from you, Jaram, where you are talking of a use case where there is a prod server crash every day to determine the optimization of MI and CDI both. Okay. Now that's again I can't give a very there is no math to it currently, but definitely we can space out how much infrastructure that is needed for those CDI jobs, which we can determine, and definitely how much infrastructure that is eventually required for your mass ingestion job that we can determine, and that would be a combination of both. So that's something typically that is planned while we go ahead and engage with the customer in terms of agent sizing. So generally, if customers are having issues in terms of agent sizing, we do involve our team, professional services team, which can help out in doing, or the team on our end, which kind of helps in making sure that the sizing is correct on the customer end. But again, there is a silver lining to it while I state that we generally recommend our customer not to have club CDI and MI on the same server or same secure agent typically, because we don't know, at times some of the operations on the CDI end may require some additional, I would say, CPU, which is not inherent or allocated at that point of time. So might be something where you want to keep your, say, secure agents typically different for MI and CDI. All right. Yeah, I'll just move on to next one. So there is a question regarding losing of CDC data. Mechanism to recover. Okay, that's typically an important one, I think. So when we talk about losing of CDC data, mostly this is important because we generally have recovery on our end where you can restart based on a different say point of time when exactly you determine that there is a loss which has happened. If at all there is a loss which has happened, first of all. So if there is a data loss, you can typically go back in the log file and restart the incremental or the CDC changes to be pushed back again so that you don't lose that CDC data on your. So that eventually can happen. But if you are talking from a recovery mechanism in cases of maybe an agent crash and things like that, we generally store the last restart checkpoint on our target in such cases, and we restart from that last restart checkpoint that is stored on the target and make sure that we are not losing any data. Hope that helps answers the query. And I would love to hear back more in terms of if you are seeing any typical use cases where customer is facing issue. Do write to us as well. I mean, if there are any specific ones, we'll love to understand those use cases as well, because in summary, we have jotted down some of these asks or best practices based on whatever we have been, as I was saying, whatever we have been hearing on the field. But I would love to hear from partners as well. What are some of the challenges that the customer faces when you go and talk with them? I mean, what are the typical challenges they kind of talk about, or what is that they are looking on to? Maybe that's something which I would love to hear back more on. Yeah, I think Harshita has posted the mail ID as well. So do drop a note if you want to. If there are any specific challenges that you are seeing with customers, would love to capture those and talk about some of those areas as well. So, all right, I'll move to the other questions over here, which I see. Okay, if the log files are no longer present because of a delay, okay, yeah, there can be scenarios, and that's why we recommend, as you might have heard or seen as part of the presentation or the discussion which I was providing, that one of the things that we typically tell our customers to make sure that the log file retention period is something which is not hurting the CDC capture. And there can be scenarios. So we have seen generally in cases of Oracle where there is say aggressive log archiving policy. In such typical use cases, we can go ahead and go to the archived log files as well in order to extract those changes. But eventually we generally tend to recommend customers to have the log files retained for a certain period of time, rather than, have it for, we have seen cases where customers talk about having a 8-hour window or a 12-hour window in terms of log archiving policy, which we tend to recommend not to have, and keep it within a suitable time period so that we can go ahead and read the changes from the log file.
Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, I don't see any more coming. If there are any, please, we can open it for another minute and then we can close it. That's okay.
Sure.
All right. There are no further queries, Harshita. I think we can close for today. And if there are any further, say, input which you require, do write a note. I think Harshita has already posted the email ID, so you can go ahead and drop a note if you want to ask any specific pointers or talk about any specific customer use case as well.
Right. Thank you, Dhirendra, Sahishnu, and Om for presenting today's webinar. We request audience to take up the survey and let us know your thoughts. Today's webinar will be available tomorrow on Success Portal under the Resources tab. And you all have a great day and night ahead. Thank you for attending.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.